Hello, this is Henrik Beshman. I'm a software developer in Toronto, and I was also the webmaster for a number of community websites in Toronto from 2004 to about 2012-13, somewhere in there. And it's in that capacity that I'm creating this screencast. Um, the title: A More Accessible Taxonomy for the City of Toronto Operating Budget Summary, which I know is quite a mouthful. But I'll explain it and hopefully it'll become clear as I go along. It also comes with data sets from 2003 to 2015. So this is about the City of Toronto Operating Budget Summary, which is a document that is produced annually for the city's budget process. And the thing about it is that the detail line items are pretty good. That is, they're clear to normal people in terms of what they mean and what they refer to. But the summaries aren't very clear, and it makes, I think it makes it difficult to think about and talk about the budget, or at least more difficult than it needs to be. So let me just show you an example of what the budget looks like. So here's an example from 2015, and you'll see that the columns make basic sense. There's the staff recommended operating budget for 2015 in that particular column, and you can see the categories and line items at the left there. So, affordable housing, office, children's services, court services, and so on. If you read down the list, they make fairly good sense. But the problem I have with it is these summaries. So, for example, citizen-centered services A, wouldn't mean much to most people. They're citizen-centered, but, you've got citizen-centered services A, citizen-centered services B. That's not really a taxonomy in the sense of categorizing things according to meaning. It's some kind of bureaucratic classification that may correspond to the way they've organized the city managers or something like that, but it certainly doesn't communicate anything interesting to average consumers of this document, whether it be the citizens of Toronto or councillors or others that have an interest in this. You can see as you go down here, there's also a category, quite a large category, called agencies, which is kind of a legal form of how some of the services are delivered to Toronto. But again, that doesn't mean very much to regular folks that are trying to make sense out of this. So essentially what I did is I took these detailed line items, of which there are 53, which are things like city planning, fire services, transportation services, and so forth. There are 53 of those. I took those and reorganized and reclassified them in a more meaningful way, and also got the budget summaries going back to 2003. And I had to do a little bit of fiddling to make the categories match, but it wasn't too bad. In order to have this hopefully mean a little bit more to people looking at it. I happen to know something about all this because I was the webmaster for a number of websites such as Dufferin Park, City Rinks, Sealoss, Public Commons for quite a while, and in the process had a fair bit of exposure to the city and how it works. And certainly one of the things that I was told frequently was that most people had a hard time understanding even what the city did, never mind analyzing it in a bit more detail. So I had a run at this in 2013, gave me some time to think about it. Recently, I had some more time, so I thought I'd take a more serious run at it. Just something I'm interested in. And so what I did was collect data. You can see here, it's the 2015 data. It looks a little bit garbled because of the process of transforming the data from essentially the PDF documents into some kind of a spreadsheet. I didn't have to make it look pretty. I just had to make it machine readable. So, because I programmed all this, so I have a column here for amount, and then I've those 53 line items. I've categorized them here. So the software that I wrote to process all this just has to look up these terms, look up the amounts. The data goes back, as you can see, to 2003. I wasn't able to get back further. Maybe one of these days I will. It would be interesting to go back to, excuse me, amalgamation in 1998. But in any case, I got it back as far as 2003, and then wrote a bunch of code. There it is. That's sort of what I do. Goes on for, I don't know, about 1,300 lines. Wasn't too bad. Which automatically took all the numbers from those years, 2002 to 2015, and put them in a nice, tidy format with the 53 line items at the left here, and the various columns from 2003 to 2015. And then the software was able to group those numbers by the various categories that I have. And I'll get into that in a bit more detail. So this spreadsheet is available to anybody if they want to look at the details, but and it you know, it's not required to get into this for most people. Just to give you an idea that there is some structure and system behind all this. So I wanted to do this to provide a means for people to understand where the city spends its money a little bit better, to allow hopefully some more meaningful communication about it, and hopefully to get people to shift a little bit from talking about the gross number and how to reduce the budget to more meaningful conversations about what the city actually spends its money on. So the result is a document that I've published, and that is available to anyone who wants to see it. You can see that at a high level I've grouped the city expenditures by what I call program domains, being municipal services, shared services, and citizen support services. And you know, right away you get a sense for the proportion of expenditure. So municipal services are what most people would think of as City Hall, you know, going to City Hall, essentially red tape, regulations, getting permits, that kind of thing. Shared services are what most people use much of the time, such as TTC, water, garbage, that kind of thing, roads, transportation. And citizen support services are essentially more of the nature of personal support. So, for example, emergency services, housing, childcare, public health, that sort of thing. It's actually, it turns out, it's actually, you know, a pretty intuitive grouping, and makes a fair bit of sense on its own. So when you, if you're interested in this and actually get a hold of this report, then to get an overview of what things look like, I suggest that you could start by reading the introduction, which is fairly straightforward, and then including looking at this, what I call the taxonomy at a glance, which is how I've recategorized those detailed line items, and then go to page 25 of the report to get a feel for how it's categorized. There are 10 categories, 3 program domains, 53 detail line items. So let me just show you what that looks like. So here's the taxonomy at a glance, and the shared services, citizen support services, municipal services. And you can see that here are those detailed line item programs that you see in most of the budgets. And I've got them grouped by public works, for example, transportation services, solid waste, parking authority, and things like that. Public commons, which includes things like parks, public library, arenas, and like. There is a category I created called city places, because there seem to be a few things that are very specific destinations, like Exhibition Place, theaters, Toronto Zoo, Young Dundas Square. And then those get rolled up into shared services, because, again, these are all things that I think most people use much of the time. They're certainly intended to be used by everyone freely or according to fees in the case of TTC and such. Citizen support services break down into emergency services, health and welfare services, and social services. The social services are more offices for consultation and management in some cases. Toronto Police Services Board, for example, social development, finance and administration, affordable housing offices, court services. Those are relatively small number items. The health and welfare services are more substantial. Children's services, long-term care, essentially housing, and financial support, Toronto Employment and Social Services, and Toronto Public Health is in there. And then, of course, the well-known emergency services. The municipal services, or City Hall, breaks down into city management, which are things like the various key offices of the city, the chief financial officer, treasurer, city manager, mayor, city council, things like that. City development services, which is where people go again for the planning and for permits and enforcement. Also 311 is in there, local appeal body, heritage, and so forth. So these are the offices that are responsible for kind of controlling the forward motion and development in the city. There's a large category called internal services, which is what it sounds like, internal services for city departments. So facilities, fleet management, engineering, construction, information technology, legal services, and so on. And then there's this mysterious category called corporate accounts, which is kind of financial investment stuff. I don't really understand a lot of that. I presume things like financing costs, interest, and things like that is in there, although there's something called non-program expenditures, which is growing and seems to be an area that, well, doesn't fit into these other things and should probably be dug into a little bit more. But anyway, so you've got these category details that get rolled up into categories that make quite a lot of sense if you look at this: public works, public commons, city places for shared emergency services, health and welfare services, social services, for citizen support services, and then city management, city development, internal services, and corporate accounts for municipal services. So that actually worked out surprisingly cleanly, and I think it makes some sense. We'll get back to some of the analysis later. So let's move to, in fact, page 25, as I suggest there. And this gives a bit of a sense of how things break down. So here are the main categories for shared services, for example, which is public works, public works, city commons, as I looked at before, and city places. And you can see those there. To the right, sort of a graphical representation of each of them. So the main ones in public works are Toronto water, waste, transportation, and transit. Obviously, transit has the lion's share of that group. City commons, parks, forestry, and recreation has the lion's share of that group. Toronto public libraries are also fairly substantial. And city places, overall, it's a much smaller budget, about 114 million, but the Toronto Zoo and Exhibition Place has the lion's share of that. Theaters takes a fair bit of money. Well, 23 million, not that much, I suppose. So that whole category is actually quite small. And in fact, you can see how the categories are divided up when you go lower in this document. Give me a second. And so there you can see the summary of the shared services, which is public works, city commons, and city places. And you can see that public works certainly takes the lion's share. City commons is quite a bit smaller at 15% of that group, and city places just takes a sliver. So, that's just an example of how you can sort of drill down some of these numbers. Most of the categories I think you'll find are things that you're familiar with. So, for example, citizen support services includes emergency services, almost 40%, health and welfare services, almost 60%. That might surprise some people in terms of the proportions there. Police budget is actually obviously a big part of the overall budget, and yet it's part of emergency services, which is less than health and welfare in this group of services. And then when you get to a breakdown of this $2.4 billion or so for essentially City Hall internal stuff, you can see that corporate accounts is quite a large portion of that. So these detailed groupings on page 25 get rolled up into the three broad categories, and you can see an overall summary at the bottom. So fun with numbers. If you look at various aspects of that data, getting back to the overview, you'll see that a few things jump out. You'll see, for example, that the budget has gone up by almost 35%, or $3 billion in inflation-adjusted terms, from 2003 to 2015. That's a lot of money. And the city hasn't grown that much. I don't know that services have increased by 34 or 5%. Someone inside City Hall has given me a list of possible reasons for that, but just sort of some hints. So that's interesting. In nominal dollars, it's gone up by 4.4 billion, or 63%. Shared services has gone up by 50% in that time. Municipal services by 56% in that time, whereas citizen support services has only gone up by 15%. This is all in inflation-adjusted dollars. So, I mean, essentially, that means that for shared services, you know, the infrastructure stuff, there's $1.5 billion being spent today that wasn't being spent in 2003. Very interesting. And then I've got a bit of a breakdown there. If you wanted to drill down into some of the details, you could get past this area of the analysis of the 2015 budget, and just wait for my PDF to slow down a little bit. Having a bit of trouble rendering because of all these graphs. Yeah, so if you go to page 36, you'll see trend charts going from 2003 to 2015 with the detailed numbers, and again, this is all inflation-adjusted dollars, so you can see that basically the trends for all that. And if you go to an earlier section, which is, I think, Appendix B. Yeah, period changes from first to last year of the budgets. That is, it's a section that actually compares 2003 and 2015 numbers. The first part of that looks at actual numbers, but if you scroll down past all that, you'll see that these columns identifying the change from 2003 to 2015 have constant dollars in the heading there. And that gives some interesting indications, so that for example, Parks, Forestry, and Recreation here. In inflation-adjusted dollars, has gone from a budget of $265 million in 2003 to $436 million in 2015, which is an increase, again, in inflation-adjusted dollars of $171 million. That's an increase of 64%. Again, that's a lot. It turns out that between 2003 and 2015, Parks, Forestry, and Parks and Recreation at the time, 2003, took on the forestry responsibility, and in 2015, the Forestry Department within Parks, Forestry, and Recreation took up about $70 million. So you could say that $70 million of the increase between 2003 and 2015 was actually taken up by forestry, but that still leaves $100 million for PFR that was spent in 2015 that really wasn't available in 2003. And again, I don't know, you got to wonder. It would be an interesting exercise to find out where all that money went. So, lots of numbers there. I think that whole report is almost 50 pages. Provides some interesting information, such as the overall budget going up by as much as I said, and the ability to drill down. So there you have it. If anyone has any questions or comments, send me an email at the address that's noted there. I'd be happy to give anybody that has an interest for this, or any community organizations, anybody within City Hall, any councillor group that would like me to walk through this with them, I'd be very happy to do that. So just go ahead and send me an email with some questions or comments. Also, if anybody who is very technically inclined wants to look at a copy of the source code that generates all this data from the source information, I'd be more than happy to share that. I guess that's it. Have a good day.